Hello, here's another interview from Culture Crafters with one of our amazing, remarkable consultants, Lorraine Brett, who is a dear friend, who is amazing. Again, she has a really cool, unique perspective. She has been part of organization in an executive role, leading an organization through a huge transformation and challenging time. She has been coaching leaders of various organizations. She's been also coaching Canadian Olympic team, and I'll let you speak to it. And she is doing a lot of work around organizations and corporate culture. So I'm really excited. Thank you, Lorraine, for agreeing to chat with me about culture, what creates culture, what destroys culture. And yeah, let's dive in.
Great. Well, I'm really excited to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So let's start with like your experience, right? Internally, externally. What do you know now that maybe you didn't know before? What is so evident to you now? What creates happy, effective culture where people want to be a part of?
Yeah. So, I think that there's a lot of things, but number one is, I always look to the heart, like what is the heart of the organization, beyond what they do is like, what is the heartbeat of the organization? And it often lies with the leaders. And, my time as an executive director, I came in at a time where there was a traumatic experience that catapulted me into this position. And, so I walked in a lot of chaos, and instinctively, okay, it could have been from my training, but instinctively I knew that I just needed to listen. I needed to open my door, and I needed to just receive and witness people. And, sometimes I didn't like what I was hearing. Sometimes it was really painful to hear what I was witnessing. But I just tried to, at the very most, stay in my heart.
Yeah.
And, on that note, what I know to be true of the most extraordinary organizations is people who work inside those organizations, they just want to feel heard and seen, and they want to know that they matter and that they're valued, right? And so I think that listening is the key, to opening the heart of the organization.
And I love what you're saying, because I think as a leader, right, especially when you said, okay, the organization went through traumatic experience, you're being catapulted, and I think a lot of people can resonate with it. You're being put into a position that maybe you're not prepared for, or you didn't know you would be doing. The first instinct, and let me fix it. I'm going to tell you what to do. Here's how we're going to take care of it, because this is our limbic reaction with stress, right? And I think the last thing you want to do is like, let me listen. And one of the reasons, as I was listening to you, I'm like, damn, like opening your door after a traumatic experience, knowing it's going to be some difficult, hard, messy conversations.
Yeah. And, it's funny because I didn't go to the place of let's fix it. Because I'm a bit of it's funny, I work in the conflict management space. And yet I have a really interesting relationship with conflict. And so I think listening was a coping mechanism to what I really wanted to do was just like run away and pretend like it wasn't happening. And so I actually, just as you were talking, I took myself back to those first days and weeks where I would sit in this big office. And honestly, Anya, I remember thinking, what am I supposed to do? How do I do it? I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
And so that's where just like, okay, open up the door, invite people in. And honestly, there was like times where there would be like steps coming down the hallway, and I could hear it. And like this, I could feel this visceral somatic reaction in my body, was just like, who's coming? What do they have to say? What am I going to be privy to? And then what do I do with it? Yeah. Right. So, but what I learned is there's always help out there. And that's, one of the things that I learned is like to ask for help on a really, really deep level and huge scale.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. So, and then, okay, so let's see, because I'm always about like the tangible, right, of like, how do you, our clients come to us and say, okay, we want to change our culture, right? We want to make it more inclusive. We want to make people feel like they belong. We want to make it, I don't know, happy people just, make more money, and happy people want to stay and they build your brand. So after you listened and you've heard, because again, right, you're opening yourself up to as many perspectives as possible, and everybody will have their own opinion, everyone will have their own idea of where to go and what to do, because from what I remember, right, being in your world, is the organization was changing. Like there was a big transformation in organization. So after you listened, then what?
Yeah. Well, this brings me to the type of listening, right? So when we talk about leadership qualities and like the recipe for leadership, the reason why I'm talking about listening so much is because I think that is one of the biggest things. So it's like when we often listen, we're listening to respond, or so we're or to deny or to defend, which means we're not actually listening. We're in our head thinking our own thoughts. And if you're thinking about the next thing you're going to say, then you're not actually listening to the other person, right? So I really felt like what I was hearing, I was listening below the words. It's what I call transformational listening or generous listening. It's like, okay, this person is saying this thing, but actually, what is it that I'm hearing really matters to them?
Yeah.
Right? And that's values. And so what I discovered is there were big problems in the organization, and the organization had lost its way because they actually didn't have an anchor. There was no anchor. And the anchor is, we can talk about mission, vision, and values. The values were never determined and distinguished. Nobody knew, right? And so I went through this whole process, and Anya, I brought you in to do an extraordinary workshop around the values. And I mean, it took us a long time. We took our time.
Yeah.
It took us about a year, but man, we landed on some extraordinary values. And I remember the day where I stood in front of about 200 of our stakeholders.
Yeah.
And unveiled the vision and the values. And, some of the people just were in tears, where they're like, I am so grateful to be involved with an organization that is taking a stand for this, right? And it's not just simply saying the words, oh, we stand for excellence. It's like, what does that actually mean, right? We also brought in the value of joy. Like, it started out as passion, but my point was, passion actually can have a dark side to it, a shadow side to it. It's like, I've seen people, especially in the industry that I was working in, is like, I just can't help it. I'm so passionate. And I'm like, but your passion is actually getting in the way of you having the impact that you're looking for, right? So anyway, it was extraordinary experience, and I'm really grateful to have helped the organization through that transition period. And then once I knew that it was kind of like the foundation. Once that foundation was set, I knew that it needed a leader that had different skills than I did, and I was moving on anyway. But I knew that the foundation was really critical. And so, looking for leaders to take over from me. When I think about my definition of leadership, it's really about leading yourself first, right? So when you talk about cultural transformation, we want people to stick around. Well, most people leave because they hate their boss, they hate their manager, they hate the people that are around them, right? So I start at the top, and helping leaders to understand themselves first and what has them react, right? And knowing that the impact you're having versus maybe the unintended impact that's running behind here that you aren't aware of, and then to take responsibility.
It's like, boom. What I loved about what you did back then, when we did the values, you've included different levels of stakeholders. And I think that's what also helps you create a culture when we call about co-creating with your people. People resonate with it when people those are the tears, because you were speaking their language, because they have contributed what was so important to the vision. And that's where I think missed opportunity when the upper management of the executive team trickles it down and says, here are top 5 values, and this is what they are. And people are like, well, and I see that in our trainings. They're like, I don't resonate with it. Like, those are not my values or my team. Like, they were not part of the process. They were not included in the process. And they don't really like, they don't want to stand behind those values. And again, the important work you mentioned, like, what does it mean? But also, how are we going to know we're doing it? Because then, like, that's the anchor. And so often there's misalignment on executive level. They don't know what their vision is. They're not agreeing. They don't have a common objective or common value. So I love how you're saying that anchor, right? If we don't have that anchor, we can't create a culture, and the culture will create itself.
Yeah, it's like your North Star, you know. So I remember I was in a meeting where we were looking to hire somebody, and someone in the meeting came forward and said, well, you know, this person that used to work for us, we'd actually intentionally, they were on contract, we actually intentionally let their contract go. But this current employee was saying, you know, like, we've got this hole in our organization, how about we bring back so-and-so? And so we had the values on the wall, and often organizations have them on the wall, but they don't do anything with them. They're just pretty words that are on the wall. And so I pointed to them and I said, so let's pick a couple of these values. And I said, pick them. Which ones? Pick 2 that you think. And so they picked integrity and excellence. And I said, okay, so let's see how this works. I said, so we're thinking of rehiring this person that we actually intentionally did not hire back, because we felt like that they weren't up to the caliber of who we were seeing ourselves in the future.
Yeah.
Is this in excellence? And is it integrity? And guess what, Anya? Like, literally in, I don't know, 15 seconds, it was like there was silence. And the answer was no, like across the board, resounding no.
Yeah.
So what did that mean? It was like, it made the decision so much easier.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it also made their job a little bit harder. It meant they had to work a little harder to go find the person that actually was espousing our values.
Exactly. Oh, I love this so
Yeah.
much. So now let's talk about your experience where, you know, what creates toxic cultures? Because when we started, and I don't know about this organization, any other organization in your experience, when, you know how we say, yeah, people leave because of managers, people leave because of leaders, they don't like the people. So what is it that creates that toxicity, you think?
Yeah, there are a lot of things. I think one thing that's a real, you know, big buzz right now is inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that's I take a wide view of inclusion. You know, I think that, you know, as we were talking about before, people want to be included. They want their voice to be heard. So that's why it was important for me. I didn't start at the top senior managers of determining the values. I don't want to say I started at the bottom, but I started with like the people that were on the ground floor, like doing the heavy lifting. Not to say the senior managers weren't doing heavy lifting, but I started there and then kind of moved it up to that place. And, you know, whether that's good or bad, I don't know, because I did have the senior managers who were kind of like, well, when do we get our chance? You know, so I probably would have done a little bit better job of, you know, expressing the vision. But yeah, including people. So, and what I know to be true is when people are included in decisions, including brainstorming, what do you think about this? Then they take more ownership of their positions, right? I don't know. What do you think about that?
I agree. I just see a lot of organizations compromise humanity because of profit. We all have those people who bring us a lot of money, and they might be really good at their job, but what companies are not noticing, the impact, negative impact these people have on teams around them, and how many of amazing people they lose, again, because they're out of integrity or they're not living in accordance with their values. in the last month, we trained a lot of managers, and one thing, so we basically gave them 10 categories that we know create the biggest impact when it comes to inclusion. And out of those 10 categories, we had 4 different groups of managers and HR partners. We asked 4 different groups to rate which one do they think will make the biggest impact if we addressed it. So there were different options, but one stayed consistent, was accountability for all. Accountability for all, which includes VP, CEO, HR, managers, people on the ground, janitors, accountability for all. And how do we include that? So that's what I think is missing, where people see double standard, where they see people get away with stuff that they're not supposed to get away, and nobody's calling out their behavior because they are good salesmen or they're good at marketing.
Yeah, well, that really speaks to having a really good designed alliance, like agreements that we make with one another. And again, it, you know, can point back to your values. It's like, but that again, that North Star, you know, let's have these maybe uncomfortable conversations about how we want to be together and what's acceptable and what's not. And the, you know, I would say old language, it's kind of like the rules of engagement, but I don't really like that, but it's like, let's design how we're going to work together. Yeah. Right. And so when you fall off the rails, you can point back and say, actually, remember, we agreed that we were going to, what's an example? Be impeccable with our word. Right. So, you know, what often happens is a meeting happens and decisions are made, and there you may be sourcing from the organization, but there might be that 1 or 2 people who are just sitting there like, you know, not saying anything. And then the meeting ends and they're like, there's this whole back channel thing that happens, right?
Meeting captured the meeting.
Yeah. And so, you know, having courageous conversations with people and saying, so one of our, you know, agreements, the social contracts that we've made with one another is that we're impeccable with our words. And so all this back channel talking, and that's one of the things that we had to really attend to at this organization that I was the ED for, is there was a ton of back channel. And it's like, as a leader, it can be scary. You know, you might want to avert your gaze, but I'm saying don't avert your gaze, go to it. But here's the thing, your heart's the key. The heart has to lead the conversation, not the head.
Yeah.
Right. And when the heart leads the conversation, that's where kindness and compassion lives. Right. And so you can have these heart-centered conversations that are really hard to have, but say, you know, what do you think, dear soul, who happens to be an employee of our organization? What do you think is the impact when you have these meetings after the meetings? What are you intending to happen? What keeps you from speaking up in the meetings? Oh, really? That's it? Okay. What can I do to support you? Or what can I do different?
Safe to actually say the things you want.
Right. So then you source it from them. Right.
I love it. I love this. It reminded me, like, both you and I went through this extraordinary leadership development program, the skill of positive regard. Have a positive regard for your people. I talk about it. We're good people. You have good people. They have good intentions, right? They often don't realize the impact they have by back channeling or not saying the things they say. So that feels like a good tip. I love how you said, go towards back channel. Listen to your people. They have things to say, and that will kind of like uncover the gaps, right? Where are the gaps? Like, what are people saying? Like, why are they not feeling safe enough to speak up, right? Or contradict? And how can we involve them in kind of like creating those new social agreements or social contracts?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, often what happens is, because we don't lean into those uncomfortable conversations and lean into the toxicity that goes around, what happens is there's a propensity that we can dismiss it and then get rid of the person. You don't fit our culture. Well, maybe they're actually speaking for the system that's inside this current culture that you have.
Oh my God.
Right?
That's like a whole other 30-minute interview, the system and the culture and assimilation.
Yeah, but guess what? You hired them. You hired them. So it's your responsibility to do something with it. And an option is, you know, to get rid of them. They don't fit. They're not your people. And and that may be true, but it may not be true. It may be that there is something that is bubbling to the surface, that and they're speaking the voice of the system. So
Great. It reminds me of like, yeah, we tolerate diversity as long as you can assimilate with the culture that we already have.
oh yeah.
Right. So that's, I'm like, ugh, like we have this culture and yeah, we tolerate it. And it's like, how can we celebrate, right, versus tolerate? So that would be, that's next. Well, I'm really excited. I'm gonna link to your LinkedIn profile, and I'm looking forward to when we all go back to normal and can actually train teams, like go outside and design and help them create this. We call it culture by design, and it really is just individual behaviors, right, that create culture, like at the bottom line. And I love all the tips you've given to like the executive team and leaders.
Well, I hope that we don't go back to normal.
Yeah,
I hope we co-create something new that is really inspiring and engaging people in a whole new way. And I think it starts with, there's a lot that this time has taught us. And number one is your heart's the key.
Listen to your heart. Yeah, be a good human being. And that's how we're going to end this. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lauren. Always such a pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks you. Thank you.